Welcome to Newsday. I'm Mariko, live from Singapore.
And I'm Karishma Vaswani, coming to you live from Sydney, Australia. It's the day before Australians decide who will be their next Prime Minister, incumbent Scott Morrison or his rival Labour leader Anthony Albanese. Australia's economy grew strongly throughout the pandemic, but many are concerned that the rising costs of living and climate change are making it unlivable.
Also in the program, Joe Biden is on his way to South Korea on his first Asian trip as US president. The International Committee of the Red Cross says it has registered thousands of Ukrainian prisoners of war from the Azovstal plant in Mariko this week. And 36 years later, the wait is over for Top Gun fans, and Tom Cruise is lauded with the highest honor at the Cannes Film Festival.
This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to Newsday, coming to you live from Sydney, Australia. It's a very grim morning out here, as you can see behind me. Rainy day today. I'm coming to you live from just in front of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We're taking shelter, in fact, underneath the Sydney Opera House from the rain. Iconic images, of course, for people here in Australia, but around the world as well. And this week, Australia has been in the global headlines, hasn't it? Because it's just the day before the election, and we're going to talk you through some of the major issues in just a moment. But let me tell you about the facts and figures in this election. It's the Liberal National Coalition, of course, going up against the opposition Labour Party, as well as independent candidates and minor parties. We've also got all 151 seats in the lower house of the House of Representatives, which will be up for grabs. The party or coalition holding a majority in the lower house will form a government. Voting is compulsory for all Australians. You must register when they turn 18. If you don't do that, then you face a fine of about $15 or 20 Australian dollars. And while you don't vote directly for a Prime Minister in Australia, voting for the party instead, based on which party wins, the leader becomes the Prime Minister. And in this election, it's a choice between two men who are very familiar to Australian voters: the incumbent, Scott Morrison, or ScoMo, as he is sometimes called here, and Anthony Albanese, who, in keeping with Australia's affection for nicknames ending with O, is sometimes known as Albo. Well, for more on all of these issues, let's talk to the BBC's Australia correspondent, Shaima Khalil, who has been covering this country for several years now. Great to have you on the program, Shaima.
The weather for you.
I know. Thank you for that. I've got to say, I remember when you first came out to Australia, and we had that discussion, didn't we, that you're entering a really major story right now. You were confronted firsthand with the effects of global warming here.
Absolutely. I remember it was my first week on November 2019, and we exchanged a message, and you said, I think you're walking into a big story. And of course, it was the start of that catastrophic bushfire season. It was my first story, and I would say by far one of the biggest, if not the biggest story I've covered here in Australia. It was after years of drought, and this was really, if you will, the country's touching this and seeing this firsthand, the effects of a warming planet. The science is clear. Yes, you cannot link this to one particular incident, but the way and the ferocity and how regular extreme weather has become really is a sign of what Australia is facing. Mind you, I've covered this when I started. Last week, I was in Brisbane, I was in Queensland, speaking to people whose homes were destroyed by catastrophic floods. So in the span of 3 years, if you think about it, apart from the pandemic, Australians have been through so much of what climate change and extreme weather would look like.
Yeah, absolutely, Shaima. And in your conversations, in your time reporting here, particularly for the election, is that what the voters are telling you? Is that the sense you're getting from them, from the electorate?
Look, it's really interesting, and I think, for the benefit of our viewers, it's very important to note how politically sensitive the climate debate is, how toxic it is, and this is why you'll see that even though it's so pertinent, it touches everyone, politicians have almost steered clear from speaking outright about it. I think it depends on where you are. If you're here in Sydney, if you're in Melbourne, if you're in the big cities, this is a topic that everybody talks about. The independent politicians, the candidates, have made this center to their campaigning. But again, I was in regional Queensland, an area that is so heavily dependent, economically dependent on fossil fuels. And there is a real worry there that yes, the writing is on the wall. Yes, this is coming to a head, but what are you going to do if you replace fossil fuels? What is going to happen? And so you'll see that the two major parties, the way that they're campaigning sounds very different in big cities when they are in regional Australia, where they're still backing the mining industry, essentially.
Yeah, and you know, those economic issues coming to the forefront, certainly
Absolutely.
in this election, Shaima. But I just want to pick up on another story that I know you've covered extensively here in your time
Yes.
here. It's a big election issue as well, the treatment of women in Australia.
Yes, and if we go back to those teal independents, if you will, and teal is the color that they've basically chosen, it is so symbolic. If you look at how they're really holding the balance of power, analysts have said if this is a close election, which it will be, which it is, the teal independents will hold the balance of power. They have come really, really close. They are becoming a real threat to very established government seats here in Sydney and in Melbourne. And if you look visually at it, it is 4 independent female candidates that are actually challenging 4 male candidates that have very established seats.
Shaima, fascinating stuff. We could talk all day about this. I wish we had the time. Sadly, we don't. Shaima Khalil there, the BBC's Australia correspondent. What a star, isn't she? We've got lots more for you on the Australia election. Don't forget, all online on the BBC's website. I want to point you to this particular story that's quite high up on the BBC's index today. It's by Frances Mao, where she explains that although Australia is one of the most multicultural nations in the world, it's a different story in the country's politics, where 96% of federal lawmakers are white. So do be sure to read that story, bbc.com/news. That's it from us out here in Sydney, Australia. For now, Mariko, back to you in the studio in Singapore.
Thank you so much for that, Karishma. Let's now get some other news. And Joe Biden is on his way to Asia, his first trip to the region as US president. His first stop is South Korea, where he'll meet the new president, Yoon Suk-yeol. He'll then head to Tokyo to meet Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and he'll hold a summit with the Quad. That's the US, Japan, Australia, and India. All of this is sure to be watched closely by neighbouring China. To discuss this, I'm now joined by Niels Graham, Assistant Director with the Atlantic Council Geoeconomic Center, live in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Firstly, what message do you think President Biden would like to send to the Asian countries? And more importantly, I guess, what kind of reception will he receive?